Log Horizon, Volume 8. Chapter 3. After the Gig. Audio source: wuxia-worldaudiobook.com. Boksut. The name was well known throughout the Yamato archipelago. Originally it was the name of the mountainous region, but it became the name of the area, the name of the ridge, and the name of the fortress. There were several roads going from east to west Yamato, but the ones along the Pacific coast all had to pass through Boksut. Excluding marine trade, it was essentially the only trade route and was a strategic location on Earth. The place was called Hakone, and of course Toya had heard of it. He was sure he'd heard about it from a friend during social studies classes when they had said about going there with their family. The strongest impression was that of a web TV travel program. Toya's family often watched those programs over dinner. His mother liked traveling, and the only places they could take Toya with his legs were places like tourist hot springs, so they watched a lot of those programs. The impressions of Hakone across the monitor were lakes and hot springs. They were now approaching a mountainous trail to Boksut. It was nearing half a day since they'd joined the trail, but they were surprised, you might even say dumbfounded. It was a genuine mountain trail. You might ask them what they were talking about and call them idiots, but those were Toya's true feelings. The road was only about 3 meters wide, only just wider than the carriage. Sometimes it was reinforced with stones and stakes, but the majority of the red clay had been turned to mud by falling rain. The road was unstable, but seemed to cling to the slope as it wound its way up. To the right was the slope continuing up to the summit, tightly packed with foliage like Japanese cedar trees. To the left was the slope dropping down to a valley, a dizzying difference. Rather than just the scenery, the road itself had to wind back and forth, sometimes seeming to double back on itself to deal with the whims of the uneven terrain. It was March, and though the signs of winter remained, the natural vitality was strong and the thick scent of greenery filled the air. In other words, despite having gotten used to Seldisia after the catastrophe, it was enough to give Toya, Minori, and Sarah a shock. Azuzu was more used to nature than the other three, but that was things like hills past to farmers' fields. Amazingly wide floodplains with tall weeds growing on them and taking mysterious watermelons from vegetable gardens behind disrepaired school buildings. She was used to things of that level, but this actual mountain path left her dumbfounded. This was a world filled with ruins from the Age of the Gods. They wanted to complain that even though there were lots of destroyed places, there were urban highways, so why was Hakone in particular left without asphalt for the mountain roads? It wasn't just mulched leaves covering the forest path, huge, wet black boulders twice Toya's size jutted up from the ground, making the road detour just to avoid them. Rondelus, the only one of them with this experience, was nodding sagely, tiredly saying, "This is why I told you to get fired up this morning." If that was said, Toya couldn't help but get fired up. Their savior was their fellow traveler, Rotu, and the pale horse she summoned. This pale white horse, even after Rotu had lowered her level with the mentor system and could only summon one, had enough strength to continue pulling the originally two-horse carriage. The winding and undulating road meant that even in the carriage it was uncomfortable and their speed wouldn't increase. So Toya and Rondelus got off the carriage and walked AEAD as if they were guiding it. The girls were exhausted in the back of the carriage and occasionally walking behind. A white wolf cub was running around Toya's feet with a boasting, gallant expression. Toya couldn't help but see it as a white Shiba, but according to Sarah it was Wolf-chan. It was a helper summon, summoned by a special skill in the summoning family. It would stay around as long as Sarah didn't order it away. Therefore, apart from when they slept at the inn, it had spent the journey like this, surveying their surroundings, on guard. "I can summon a patrol spirit too." Rondalis turned back to row 2, languishing on the driver's seat, and shot back. "No, you don't need to, Sister Row 2. In the early morning, Row 2 had tried out her zombie bats. They were fairly grotesque looking, and Sarah had crouched down and gone teary-eyed. Moreover, there wasn't a need for that much vigilance, so the strategy of having Row 2's zombie bats patrol was rejected. She was already maintaining the Pale Horse summon, and they judged it would take too much mana. It might not seem it, but they're cute when you get used to them. Row 2 had the class of Summoner, which specialized in summoning. There was a great variety of summons that they could call forth to work for them, so they had a wide range of applications, making them the most active class since the catastrophe. Undines that could produce water and manipulate coldness, and salamanders that could create fire and manipulate heat were examples of this. In short, though there was a great variety in summoners, most could be separated into 4 types. Elementalers that controlled things like water and fire spirits. Beast tamers that had unicorns and carbuncles. Alchemics that controlled slimes and golems, and finally necromancers that had skeletons and phantoms. These trends weren't exclusive normally. Around 70% of summoners contracts with spirits, but they also summon beasts with talismans and create their own style. With those combinations and balances, summoners have many opportunities to show their skill. Minori read aloud from her notebook. Most of it was second-hand knowledge from Shiro. But Row 2 was a real necromancer. She only had contracts with dead spirit-type monsters, not making a single one with other types. Because she had a pure build, her applications were limited. After the catastrophe, Toya had heard that their popularity had vanished from Naotsugou. Their summons looked scary and grotesque, and they were hard to come to an understanding with. If you looked at the wolf that Sarah summoned, he didn't really think it could be helped. Of course, in battle, the white puppy-like monster would fight gallantly, but it was brimming with curiosity and seemed pampered, almost like a pet. Toya guessed that together with normal sensibilities, these fluffy ones would be more popular. Toya, I'm looking, Rudy Ni. On this mountain with poor visibility, there weren't many places where their line of sight was good. In exchange, when the mountain jutted out, they could see 3 or 4 bends AEAD. Probably around 15 minutes from where they were, they could see 2 carriages which had come to a standstill. It didn't appear they were under attack, so they probably had some kind of trouble. Toya began to think what to do. From the looks of things, they were going in the same direction, west in other words. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, they'd just follow behind. But with him stopped it was a different matter. The road here wasn't wide enough to pass. They might be able to solve things with an adventurous strength, but they didn't know the situation yet. It looks like they're stuck. Yeah. What's up? Did something happen? They heard Row 2's voice from the driver's seat. She was exhausted and dealt poorly with sunlight, so she probably missed the scene from earlier. It appears that 2 carriages got into trouble around 3 or 4 turns away and stopped. I don't think we'll be able to pass them, Row 2 Nichan. I see. I'm your Oni-chan after all. Row 2 meaninglessly puffed her chest out, but she didn't appear to have a particularly good idea or anything. At any rate, let's get there first. Let's do that. After getting Minori's agreement, they continued along the trail and, as expected, met a stranded group of traders. Hey, do you want to buy a sword? They're fine gems from Akiba, equipment level 20. This was what greeted them. A trader with bags beneath his eyes called out to Toya with this. Toya was surprised but quickly shook his head. We're already a higher level, so we won't use those swords. What happened? The merchant, slowly shaking his head, seemed to be the leader, but looking around there was an escort of 3 people, exhausted, sitting on wooden boxes. Most of the luggage with trade materials and one of the carriages had a broken axle. The carriage Minori and the others were riding was around 20 meters away, because if they need to go back and change direction, it was easier to not come any closer. This area was narrow, even compared to the rest of the narrow mountain trails, so there wasn't enough space to pass, and one wrong step would lead to the carriage rolling down the sparse slopes. "Looks like we're stuck, Toya." "Yeah. Most likely. If the luggage was all metal swords, the carriage was overloaded to begin with. The solution was simply push the broken carriage into the valley and take what they could on the other carriage, abandoning the rest." However, this was stock they'd obtained, so they likely would hold on to it tightly. "It's been a whole day since the axle broke. Please forgive the merchants if they're rude." From inside the carriage, a gentle-looking woman descended. Before them was a woman, with light brown hair, like the ears of silver grass, wearing a long skirt and a bolero jacket, coordinated with yellows from daisies and dandelions, and a large hat. Her eyebrows traced out a gentle curve, and the beautiful woman looked affectionately at them. WuxaWorldAudio.com. With the slight scent of hepatica in the air, Toya felt strangely melancholic as he looked at the woman. Toya's premonition was correct. This woman, who seemed nothing but gentle, was enduring awful feelings. But he couldn't understand why. "I am a traveling writer, Dariella." The woman sweetly curtsied in greeting. "You're young, but you're adventurers, correct? Spending another night here would be tough on the merchants, so even if it's just a Boksuit fortress, could you carry a few boxes? With your help, I think we'll quickly be able to get over the next ridge. It would save the merchants from their predicament too." The woman, who called herself Dariella's plea was graceful. Her kind words held persuasive power, and Toya and Rundalis reflexively nodded. There was no other choice in a situation like this. The two of them turned back to go and discuss it with Minori. End chapter. Log Horizon, Volume 8. Chapter 3. 2. Audio source: WuxaWorldAudiobook.com. What had broken the merchant cart's axle was the sharp bumps in the mountain road. It was hard to tell by looking because the earth covered them slightly, but the road had stones jutting out of it that the axle had run aground on. Following that, it had fallen down onto another, pointed rock. It had only fallen around 10 centimeters, and normally this wouldn't have happened. However, the merchants had been greedy and piled on 24 boxes of steel swords. The impact of that had broken the wheel. For a person of the land, lifting just one box would be hard, but Minori and the others had no trouble lifting 2 or 3. Holding the boxes, they continued up the road for around 20 minutes, reaching an area where it widened out into something like a viewing platform. It was an area carts could pass each other, and for the moment, they could pile the boxes up there. Sarah made preparations for lunch, and the others spent about 2 hours ferrying the boxes up. It was unfortunate, but they pushed a cart into the valley. The merchants had brought the safe cart up and used all of their energy with their escort and were now dozing. It's a mountain where demons may appear, so spending a night protecting their cargo will naturally exhaust them. Dariella the writer gently smiled at Minori. She was a person of the land. She couldn't place the age of. She was probably older than Minori, but she couldn't imagine how much older. By looks alone, she appeared a little older, perhaps the same age as Marielle, but by speaking to her, Minori unexpectedly thought she might be the same age as her, and she could see her lovely smile. "Dariella-san, are you one of their wives?" Surprised, Dariella closed her eyes and burst into laughter. "No, I'm going how and just rode on their cart." "I see. Minami then. It's in the same direction as Akoma." "Yes, it's very close. My house is in the mountains of Akoma." Dariella replied to Row 2's call as she approached. Oh, I see. The merchant's safe cart, the mound of their luggage and the party's cart were all lined up on the platform. It was surrounded by a not particularly sturdy-looking wooden railing, but the area itself pushed out into the mountain air, and a superb view of the valley below was spread out beneath them. The merchants were truly exhausted. They had someone guarding the luggage, sat against it, but the other members had taken refuge in the carriage and fallen asleep. Sarah had passed out soup, but they showed no sign of waking. Minori and the others took a late lunch. The wind was still cold, but crossing the mountains it was laden with a particular impression of greenery. "What's this soup?" "It's miso soup with potatoes and carrots. And this long thing. It's a spring onion." From a little distance away, Minori listened to Sarah and Rotu's conversation with a smile. Eating on the mountain was fun and like they had a packed lunch. Azuzu was sitting on a fallen tree, swinging her legs, with Rundalis next to her, stuffing his cheeks with rice balls. Dariella was with him and offering around pickles with a gentle aura. "Toya, does your stomach hurt?" "Not at all." Minori was worried about Toya, sitting by himself and thinking absent-mindedly, and called out to him. Her reliable younger brother smiled widely at her and answered, "What about you? Are you yearning for Sharonihun?" "Geez, I'm not." "Well, that's fine. Once we cross, we'll be much closer to our destination." "Yes, and the wyverns, right?" According to Shiro-san, it's not impossible for them to appear in these mountains. Flying monsters have a wide sphere of activity. Then we'll need to watch out. Following Toya's gaze into the sky, Minori noticed something. There was a group drawing near. A vanguard party of knights, all clad in full armor and with heavy equipment. There were probably around 10 adventurers, for some reason leaving an impression of gloom. They soon noticed Minori and the others and climbed the mountain road. Coming from Minori and the others' direction of travel, it was a route to the foot of the mountain. Minori quickly traveled, checked their status. The vanguard was a samurai named Ishijiru, his guild was Plant Waden, level 90. The others had the same guild and similar levels, there were 14 of them. On the Yamato server, there wasn't much Peking. Or at least not much was heard of around Akiba. However, they couldn't hide their unease at meeting another party deep in these mountains. Rondalis moved nonchalantly to Toya's side. He took a pose with his cloak like a young noble, but from his positioning, Minori knew he was protecting Azuzu and Sarah behind him. The party walked unhurriedly, at a constant pace. Being high-level, they should also have high-level mount riding, but there wasn't a single one of them on a mount. The 14 approached the mountain in nearly double file. This was a wide space, so it wasn't like the narrow paths where they couldn't pass. They could just watch them go. It might be thought of as cowardly, but Minori was relieved. The central four in the group were supporting a large object. It looked like one of the portable shrines that were dedicated to shrines and used in festivals. It was decorated in a very Western fashion, but was surrounded by thick poles that crossed wells. One person in each direction held them as they carried it. "It's the mobile shrine of Boreas," Dariella murmured. Amongst them, the only one who didn't show a sign of unease was Rotu, and she asked in an unconcerned tone of voice, "What's that? I've not seen it much." "The Odyssean Knights carry it everywhere. I heard it's used as a sacred tool of the adventurers." Azuzu and Sarah had puzzled expressions on hearing that. Minori hadn't heard of it. The words Odyssean Knights were the same. Just by hearing them, a chill ran down their spines. When Minori had just checked them, their guild was Plant Waden. So the Odyssean Knights weren't a guild. Minori didn't know what to think. She'd heard the word Odyssea before. An organization with the supreme goal of returning to the original word. Hearing just that would be fine. In some meanings they were a group acting by proxy for all adventurers' feelings. But whilst working in Akiba's guild hall, helping the 8th shopping district, she'd heard rumors they were all clad in the hue of gloom. The group approached. They could already distinguish equipment and their individual faces. All of their equipment was clean and in order. Rather, it appeared systematic to Minori. Without idle chatter, they moved forward at a constant pace. Adventurers had inexhaustible stamina, and they were level 90, so that shouldn't have been anything, but they gave of the impression of an exhausted group of corpses. The mobile shrine of Boreas revives adventurers. Dariella probably didn't understand being a person of the land. Her words were distant, sounding like it was someone else's problem. And, I don't know if it's a side effect, but it's said it disturbs the voices of their heart. It seems important to the adventurers. Minori and Sarah exchanged glances. Despite her words, this was the first time they'd heard of such an item. WushAWorldAudio.com. Troubled by the response, they didn't understand Dariella's words completely. Within Minori, she had the feeling of refusing an understanding of something. If it was as she said, that mobile shrine would act in place of a shrine and revive adventurers that lost their lives nearby. It was like a substitution for a revival point. No, it sounded like it itself was a revival point. It could be thought of as a blessing which enhanced the adventurer's immortality, but on the other hand, it still seemed horrendously ominous. Minori quietly murmured her brother's name in unease. Toya was furthest forward out of them all, watching the Odyssea Knights with a daunting pose, so Minori could only see his back. Toya didn't reply. However, his twin Minori knew the air of tension dwelled within him, just as if they were fighting. The group approached the side of the plateau, and with no regard to Minori and the others continued their constant walk, as if they were searching for something, or being led. It felt like a long time passed, but if they were thinking calmly, it was only around 10 minutes. They just passed through, with no trouble. However, Minori couldn't erase the growing feeling of unease in her chest. End chapter.
Log Horizon, Volume 8, Chapter 3. Audio source, WushAWorldAudiobook.com. A track made of magic circles was projected about 30 meters forwards, and nature was twisted according to their established effect. The wildlife, overgrown from the interference of dryads and trents, was made into a tunnel. The surrounding trees were avoided by warping them. The magic circles continued AEAD, bring light. They didn't just interfere with nature to make space, they produced a floating force field rail that made movement easy. On top of them, moving via repulsive force, were steel vehicles. They were 8-meter large box-like vehicles, with Baruch armor and glass inlays for windows. Those were tinted and you couldn't see inside. In the fourth back, a 2-floor construction that had a canopy that could open, there was a woman. Her proportions brought to mind a carnivore, and she wore a military uniform, Mizufa Trude. She was a highly ranked general for the Holy Empire of Westland. The general had a cynical smile on her face that brought together stubbornness and shallowness as she gazed out through the glass. One beautiful leg rested over the other, showing her relaxation. Her left index finger caressed circles on her sword's hilt. Mizufa was satisfied with the vehicle's performance. The vehicle had enough mass that it wouldn't move without the chained rail, but thanks to the magic circles, it could even navigate uneven terrain like within these mountains. Even the hard-to-deal-with mass, when its defensive properties were taken into account, it wasn't only a flaw. The adventurers desired flight. This steel vehicle had failed mid-development and been discarded as an unusable toy. But to Mizufa and other people of the land, even this discarded toy was worth more than gold. That overwhelming difference in technological strength made Mizufa smile. It wasn't just technology, magic, stamina, inventiveness. Adventurers had many times more of these than people of the land. It was as if someone had decided they would play the lead role in the world, and Mizufa and the others would be the supporting role. Mizufa suppressed her amusement in the back of her throat. She didn't know who, but it was a cruel comedy. Our progress is good. Our location, as before, the eastern part of the Forest of Deep Sorrow. As Mizufa sat in the center of the steel vehicle, her soldiers were currently carrying out a top-secret mission, Operation Red Knight. There were only a few involved. However, it was an important mission involving the cutting-edge technology of the steel vehicle, some in Orban EXP pots. Even the 10-seat council confirmed its importance, but Mizufa thought it wasn't there yet. The adventurers didn't even slightly understand the meaning of this operation. At the same time as allowing the council's whimsical leader to escape the castle, it encouraged the soldiers. Mizufa herself had been greatly affected by the scheme. Here, the soldiers would give their life and soul and wage war at Mizufa's orders. Nuriha was a princess that inspired blind devotion and wild enthusiasm in the Holy Empire of Westland. Her charisma was beyond words, though Nuriha-sama is capricious. However, despite all the devotion she had, Nuriha was still an adventurer. She may have gotten tired of progressing through the Forest of Deep Sorrow and had unexpectedly disappeared. The chamberlains and maids were frantic, but her disappearance was not a rare occurrence. Mizufa was calm. Besides, her aim of encouraging and inspecting the troops was accomplished. Once that was over, she wasn't needed anymore. Rather, her being nearby and meddling would be a nuisance. Leaving her be might be in and of itself a problem, but one of the 10-seat council, Roradan, was pursuing her. It was already 5 days since she had disappeared. They would probably have joined up by now. This was preferable to Mizufa. The only thing left that could be called an issue was Kazuhiko, also part of the 10-seat council. The arrogant, stubborn person was the leader of the Mibu Wolves, a private army, and stuck his nose into many of the happenings of Minami. He was an eyesore to Mizufa. They even undermined her military authority using the name of the 10-seat council as a shield and acted like a secret police. Their leader, Kazuhiko, had remained, insisting it was to confirm the safety of the summon orb. However, that too, she had taken into account. Red Knight had worth. No, strengthening this company was a process that couldn't help but further her ambitions. Mizufa laughed in her throat. The steel vehicle wasn't particularly fast. It could do about 30% of the speed of one of the latest 4-horse carriages on a highway. However, that speed didn't drop on unfavorable terrain. Naturally, it slowed through the forests and valleys, but it was faster than marching. It was certainly inferior to the machine the adventurers wanted, something that would get from Minami to Ezo in 10 hours, but it was useful in its own right. Compared to the sky, where visibility was unobstructed, moving hidden like this could be said to be better. In the first place, even the adventurers hadn't completed an aircraft. To Mizufa, this steel vehicle was treasure enough. Zuldi's developed mana breeder, and it was made useful on a large scale as Jared Gan's mana furnace, an ancient technique passed down the Kuni line. The magic technology that their children were born into was the nucleus of the adventurers' fortune, but the leftovers went to the people of the land. This steel vehicle was the same. It was simple to say. It can travel over uneven terrain. But that wasn't limited to the wilderness. The circled rail guaranteed their course and had the power to distort the trees from their path. In other words, although it was slow, they could secretly move troops through the entirety of Yamato, with its many mountain forests. Mizufa currently had 10 of these armored vehicles under her command. Among them, 4 were particularly large. The lack of numbers was a worry, and Mizufa preferred more standardized equipment, but there was no helping it. Adventurers were capricious and liked new things. They held no interest in mass-producing things that were already practically complete. Always moving to the next new, different, stronger, better thing. Of course that was beneficial for innovation, but it was irritating for military people like Mizufa. Despite its use and application in the current location and circumstances, standardized equipment was much preferred. Despite this, as she was taking their unwanted inventions, she had no intention of requesting such luxuries. She could only request a minimum of maintenance, and if push came to shove, she knew various bribes would be needed too. Adventurers were childish and weak to greed. Report the Nightshade Servant's status. Squad 1 has returned. Squads 2 and 3 are progressing from Boxer to Redstone. 4 is backup. Squad 5 is currently guarding our surroundings. Squad 6 and 7 stand relieved. Understood. That's fine. Onwards, remain on guard. Mazzufa ordered the 2 arcane mancers in the cockpit 2 floors down. The Nightshade servants on reconnaissance appear to have hit upon the upper parts of the Fevale River. Mazzufa turned her gaze to the topographic map stuck to the wall. The vehicle didn't shake much, so there were various maps, documents and files around. Mazzufa was currently in command, and despite her love of soaking her saber in blood, she was still a highly ranked general and knew her weapons well. Fevale River. This map. Whilst scanning over the small notes, she licked her well-formed lips and narrowed her eyes. The black mark of 3 claws marked it as a wyvern habitat. They were at the perfect level, and the neighboring residential areas kept just the right amount of check on them. Mazzufa's head was filled with bustling strategies. A dream of the scent of blood, the red of a red spider lily. However kind adventurers were, Mazzufa felt no sense of duty to follow that. No matter, Yamato was facing chaos. The Holy Empire of Westland was the only ruling organization that had a blood connection with the Westland Imperial dynasty to this day. The League of Freedom Cities Ystal were traitors. Of course, Mazzufa didn't believe this. A just cause was good to have. Military personnel like Mazzufa rose in the world on their exploits. So originally, in the nobility of Westland, prone towards elegance and entertainment, their rank was low. They had to take the chances they got. And Mazzufa knew bloomed above her blood thanks to her merits. No, she was drunk on blood. Whether she was searching for merits, or the scent of blood, Mazzufa herself didn't know anymore. Wyverns then. It's a lot for just the servants, but the Odyssea Knights should be close by. Silence reigned within the vehicle. Give subjugation orders to the Nightshade servants, notify the sergeants. That communication was passed immediately with the command crystal to the following vehicles. In those vehicles lay over 100 people of the land, in cramped, coffin-like beds with black masks on and in a false sleep. Connected to the beds by sockets, the summoner's orb glittered ominously. This orb would summon projections of the user's will as Nightshade servants. It was equivalent to giving the people of the land another body. Whilst their bodies lay in these beds, they obtained bodies of monsters they could move freely. Nightshade servants were summoned at the same level as their summoner, but the maximum limit of 45 hadn't been broken. To adventurers, it was worthless for fighting. In fact, the adventurers who had handed it over had done so easily, as if it were a joke item. But Mazzufa said differently. This item gave people of the land temporary immortality. Even if they were destroyed, the person lying in the bed wouldn't be damaged. And the experience went to the summoner, that is to say, the people of the land could receive it. It was a joke-like, earth-shattering magic item that you couldn't enter without humor. After 10 minutes, begin administering the EXP pots. The potions doubled the rate experience was gained. Taking them orally was inefficient. A direct injection gave a greater burden on the recipient, but their effectiveness rose markedly. Lord Kazuhiko has requested we stop the inhumane treatment? Do I care? What a hypocrite. He's an adventurer. We're people of the land. What do the deathless know about war? Those who scatter life do, right? Mazzufa laughed, a dark laugh. Mazzufa's life didn't cause the scattering, but weapons need to harvest even more flowers. The Vanguard squad has encountered enemies. A strained operator reported in a low voice. WuxiaWorldAudio.com Without panicking, Mizufa had waited for the follow-up report confirming wyverns. Unconsciously, her lips twitched upwards and she gently stroked the hilt of her sword. Vanguard Squad, attack. Drive the wyverns from the mountains. Keep for ranged magic attacks in mind and herd them into the town. Do that and those Death Seekers from Odisea will help. It's time to make a profit. They'd found a good hunting ground. The adventurers might call it power leveling, but to Mizufa, it was a drill. To temper weapons, they need to get hot and fired up, then be sharpened in blood. We're in full battle. 6, 7 and 5 of the area defense do not enter the battlefield. How is the surrounding guard? Tell Londark to arrange our defenses. 8. No, better make it a request. Contacting Lord Londark, the speaking tube. Instructions were relayed to the adventurer following them, Dromby Phantom Steeds. Do you attach Lord to Londark as well because he's an adventurer? The operator turned to Mizufa's murmuring. The female general wet her throat with wine and curved her lips. It doesn't matter, I was talking to myself. A dirty job on the extremities of the operation was suitable for the defeated man who'd washed in from Sakino. She could even think of it as gratitude. Everyone had their roles. Under Mizufa's good-humored smile and command, the Holy Empire of Westland's secret force moved speedily to the center of Yamato. Mizufa's dream Red Knight would oddly include where Minori and the others were headed, the town of Safil, but Mizufa herself didn't know the meaning of that yet. End chapter. Log Horizon, Volume 8, Chapter 3. 4th audio source, WuxaWorldAudiobook.com. Play button 4. Sarah and the others had brought the luggage to the Boxer Mountain Fortress and placed it there, as the merchants had requested. Then they continued onwards, with Duriella riding the carriage too. After losing a cart, the merchants didn't have the energy to spare to have her ride too. Whilst the highway was relatively safe, this was for people used to traveling and adventurers. A single, female person of the land couldn't feel at ease traveling alone that far. So it was settled that she would accompany the party to her current destination, Safil. Safil was one of the party's destinations too. Going west from Akiba, it was a relatively prosperous town on the highway. They planned to ease the fatigue of travel before departing. The carriage progressed along damp and mossy paved paths, along a road of red clay that looked easy to slip on, and a road passing over a ridge, hidden under an arch of deep greenery. It was slow. On these mountain roads, no matter how strong the pale horses were, they weren't that much help. If they galloped at full speed, they'd easily get into an accident. The party slowly meandered onwards, at the same pace a person would walk at. Sarah strained her ears to listen to the flute-like bird song that was coming from somewhere. She looked at Minori next to her and she looked like she was searching for the birds too. Wolf was looking around restlessly, and in his gaze birds with blue wings and a yellow line, about the size of a bread roll, let out another cry. Happy at the discovery, she pulled on Minori's sleeve to tell her, and it looked like she saw them too. They exchanged a glance and smiled at each other. Thanks to that, Sarah was considerably relaxed. The Odisea Knights were at the mountain fortress they passed through too. According to Duriella, they weren't a particularly rare sight around this area of Yamato. They were a target of respect for protecting the people of the land's villages and towns. They were severe and a somehow gloomy group, but if they were called courteous and their equipment was that of righteous knights, Sarah could see that being the case. Minori and Toya also seemed to dislike them. Since passing them on the mountain road, they'd felt the atmosphere tingle. It had been several hours since then, and Sarah felt they had to thank the bluebirds for relaxing the atmosphere. Originally, they had planned to ask to spend the night at the fortress, it being equipped with lodgings for travelers. However, after spending a night on the plateau, they had passed the fortress at high noon, so they'd lost the chance. Minori-chan, are we camping tonight as well? We are. There aren't many in towns around here. And tomorrow, we'll definitely leave early and carry on to Fuji. Then we can stay the night. Right, we'll do that. Sarah smiled widely and agreed. She'd been able to check that the trip was going as she'd imagined, and Minori was happy she hadn't overlooked anything in the area. The mountain road finally ended as it gradually grew wider. There was still an incline, but it was gentler and the thick forest turned into a copse. The visibility was less obstructed, so Mount Fuji was clearly visible. Sarah didn't know what it was called in this world, but she was deeply familiar with Japan's #1 snow-capped mountain. It's Mount Fuji. Ah, you're right, it's sacred Mountain Fuji. Toya and Rundlehouse raised their voices in excitement. Sarah herself was somewhat excited. Living in Japan, you'd see it more than once a month on web TV weather forecasts, and it was actually visible from where Sarah lived if the weather was good. It wasn't that much of a curiosity that she'd make noise about it, and if you thought about it, this wasn't their world, so it wasn't the real Mount Fuji. Even so, it felt like a somehow special mountain. Maybe it was because she was Japanese. She didn't really understand it, but Sarah had nodded to Isuzu's words of, "It's the feeling of a journey," and really did think it felt like that. As it became early afternoon, the sounds of the base were carried to them on the wind. They had finally reached the coast. It wasn't a sandy beach, it was covered in pebbles about the size of Sarah's little finger, but even so, the blue-gray sea was there. The sea was calm, and they could see several boats floating there. Maybe they were fishermen of the people of the land. It's like Shushi, but the coast seems harsher here. Sarah and Minori shared their impressions and frantically began looking for Sawagan. Of course, thankfully there weren't any of those monsters, and the two of them smiled at each other. Now that we've come this far, Safiel is only a little further. Have you stayed there before, Doriela-san? Yes, it's on my way home, so I've stayed several times. We'll reach there tomorrow. If we hurried, we could reach it in the night. Sarah and the others all shook their heads at Minori's words. Pushing themselves was forbidden. This was another lesson they had learned on their journey. However, that being the case, they had to camp tonight. Sarah looked up at the heavens. The wind seemed strong, but it was clearing the skies, and it didn't appear like it would turn bad. So there wasn't much difficulty in camping. The shoreline was a little scary, so they should go further inland and found a copse of trees. Just from looking around, there were several that would work as windbreaks. Despite the road they'd been traveling on along the coast was level and easy to walk on, and had many places you could camp, they had bustled around and it was already evening. I should make dinner then. Sarah's thoughts swirled in her head. She'd volunteered for dinner duty. Cooking on the road was always difficult. Before they'd left, she'd learned from Nyana, but now that it was the real thing, she couldn't make even half the things she wanted to. Outside, without even a chopping board, the circumstances were just too different. She felt sorry for only being able to make disappointing food. In actual fact, her worries were unfounded. For people of the land, travel provisions were hard and heavy: bread and watered wine or meat. The party's food, soups and okonomiyaki, were part of the adventurer's culture, and not popular in this world. Even what Sarah had learned from Nyana's outdoor cooking was what skilled chefs had done to pass the time in their new life after the catastrophe, so it was a little off from common sense. Maybe pasta soup, Sarah mumbled, having gone red. If I use the pot I bought on Gluttony Street and make a soup base and add some dried meat, then put in the leaf-shaped pasta, it should be filling. It might be a little sour afterwards, but some apple mayo salad should make that better. One plate, it really looks like I'm cutting corners. That's not true, warm soup is delicious. Minori encouraged her from by her side. Sarah smiled slightly in shame. She wanted to work hard like Nyana and be able to gauge how much she'd need and be able to feed a stadium. But without a magic bag, she was limited to the ingredients and seasonings she could carry, and outside with no place to prepare food, and having to manage the heat source, it took a lot of work. When she tried to do something a little complicated, she simply burst in failure. With the newlywed's apron, with Nyana-san applique, she couldn't use her housekeeper subclass as an excuse either. You all seem to get on well. Dariella spoke with a gentle expression to Sarah and Minori, who had comforted her when troubled. "We're friends after all. It's because we're friends," Isuzu called back along with Minori's answer from where she was walking. "Aed. Are you in the same guild?" "No, I'm in a different one," Sarah answered, but her chest was filled with the feelings of friendship. "Sarah-chan is part of the Crescent Moon Alliance. We're part of Log Horizon." "Ah, and I'm a traveling vampire with no guild." Ro2 joined in the conversation too from the driver's seat. "If you'll pardon my curiosity, why are you all going to Minami?" "We're not. We're stopping on the way over in the Redstone Mountains to hunt wyverns." Toya answered her question. "Well, wyverns. They can sometimes come down to the village." "Can they, Minori-chan?" Shiro-san said that happens sometimes. Sarah cocked her head in puzzlement. According to Minori's sketch, she'd thought of them as monsters like planes with limbs, flying in the sky. Maybe they did come down to human habitation. "And afterwards, we're doing a tour." Isuzu had fallen back from the front at some point and spoke up. "A tour? What's that?" "That's right, you haven't seen either, Ro2-san." "Sarah." "Ro2-san." Sarah began wondering how to explain it and looked to Isuzu for help. Isuzu hugged the spear she was using instead of a walking stick to her chest and mimed playing the lute, saying, "It's a traveling performance." With one eye closed, Isuzu-san is a bard. Though I'm still only a beginner. So with Isuzu in the center, we're playing music in villages and towns. "Ah, music?" Possibly pleased from the admiration in Dariella's voice, she span lightly as she kept stepping forwards. "Though I look like this, I'm known as the Rock and Roller in Akibis Bloom Hall." "Rock and Roller? It's..." In response to Ro2's dubious question, Sarah answered with, "It feels cool." Minori had been restraining her laughter, but couldn't hold up to that. Sarah started protesting at her. She'd thought the explanation might be a little strange herself, and couldn't stop blushing. It was Isuzu's fault for using a phrase like rock and roller that wasn't really heard recently, and she couldn't explain. Puffing out her cheeks, Sarah decided that was right and looked at Isuzu, full of conviction, but she didn't notice because she was rolling her shoulders and stroking down from above, taking a rock and roller pose. The only one sympathetic to her was Wolf, gambling around her feet. "I've an interest in music." "Yes, it's amazing." Ro2 and Dariella praised her, and Isuzu was in a good mood. Then, tomorrow evening, we'll play in Safiel, so come and watch please." "We'll play? Hey, Minori, it's fine, right?" Isuzu braced herself and asked Minori. They'd planned to stay 2 nights at Safiel, and after recovering their energy finally pushed through to the Redstone Mountains. In Boxer, even though it was a mountainous district, it was still a route used for trading, so they could pass through. In the Redstone Mountains though, there was only hunting, so at the worst, there might be no road and they'd have to travel on foot through the hills and fields. "I'll sing with Isuzu-san too." Sarah joined in too, and Minori nodded without worry. "Okay, that's fine. We'll take it a little slow in Safiel." With those words at their back, they kept going a little further until dusk. End chapter.